Hello friends, welcome to the EduSat Network. Our today's topic of discussion is India-China relations, and this lecture of ours is part of our series on India's foreign policy, and we have this in our studio subject expert Dr. Rajan Kumar. He has been associated, and in fact he is steering the series on India's foreign policy. Dr. Rajan Kumar is Assistant Professor, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. He has been teaching in the same university, JNU, since 2007. He has published research articles in reputed journals, and last time I even mentioned the title of one of his books. And with this introduction, I would like to welcome Sir to our EduSat studio. Welcome, Sir.
Thank you, Urvashi, and good afternoon, my friends. In the series of discussion that we are having on India's foreign policy, and I think we have a number of lectures on bilateral relations, then the discourses of India's foreign policy. We also discussed various the determinants of India's foreign policy in one of the previous lectures. So in the context of bilateral relationship that India has with major powers, today we'll discuss India's relation with China, or Sino-Indian relations as it is referred to in the literature. Please understand that when you're analyzing the foreign policy of an important country like China, you have to understand various dynamics. For instance, the countries, when India's foreign policy is evolved in the context of the important countries, for instance, United States, China, the important powers of the international system. This is not just the bilateral relationship. You have to understand the global geopolitical context, or in terms of international politics, the international system. Then you need to understand the multilateral agreements which are there between the various powers and the various groups that we have, and bilateral relationship comes later. So, but bilateral relationship is an important aspect of relationship between any two countries. So, in the context of China, please understand that China is not a small country. China is a very, very powerful country in the international system today. If I have to take a few names, the countries which are very important in today's international system, the first, of course, is United States, as you know. The second is China. The third is Russia, of course. Fourth can be European Union, and India is, of course, important. So when we are dealing with India's relations with one of these countries, for instance, when you are dealing with India's relationship with United States or China or Russia, so you'll have to take into account international system. Even when you're dealing with bilateral relationship, international system is important, because international system, or the broader geopolitics that you call it, so that plays a very important role in deciding the relationship between two countries which are international players, or the systemic players as we call it. So in that context, against that backdrop and the background, I would like to discuss India's relation with China, where I'll discuss a few things. I'll start with the history or the historical background between India and China relations in the 1950s, 60s, and in the later years. After that, I'll give you the broader bilateral cooperation framework that is there between India and China. The third is there are certain security concerns. As you know that China is respected by India, but at the same time, India is also concerned and cautious about China, partly because of the history, the kind of conflicts that we had between India and China. So that security concern is very important when we are talking of India's relationship with China. The next is multilateral cooperation. Please understand that the two countries, India and China, they are also engaging in the multilateral forums. Of course, United Nations as the universal organization, that's one forum, but apart from that, there are certain regional organizations and multilateral organizations where both India and China are members. For instance, BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So in BRICS, India and China are cooperating. Again, when it comes to Shanghai Cooperation Organization, you know that India is the observer. India has the observer status in Shanghai Cooperation Organization, but there is some kind of engagement, political and security engagement there as well. So what I'm trying to explain you is that you have to see the relationship between India and China first in terms of the broader geopolitics or international system, which plays a role The second is the bilateral cooperation or bilateral mechanism which are there between India and China. Third, the security issues which are very important, and the fourth is the multilateral cooperation. But I'll start with the history, because the history of relationship that is there between India and China, that has impacted the contemporary relationship that we have between the two countries. And history, as you know, that the history when in the 1950s when when India got independent in 1947, and China, the Communist Party of China, came to power in 1949 by replacing the nationalist government there, or the Kuomintang government there. So that was the beginning of a new phase in the two countries, where India was a newly independent country from the colonial British rule, and China also assumed a new kind of politics, a very a communist politics, which was following in the initial years, China was following the Stalinist model or the Leninist model in the Soviet Union. And what is the context? What is the broader historical context? Please understand that India had become immediately independent in just few years back. Then the World War II had ended, when China was in the side of allies against Japan, and there were conflicts between China and Japan. So a new politics, the Cold War politics, was in the process of emerging in the post-World War II period. And the historical context, the beginning of Cold War and the Tibet issue, which I'll discuss later. So the broader, if you see the geopolitical context, the communist China and newly independent India. India's leader was Jawaharlal Nehru, who was a very famous political leader in the third world countries, and he was recognized in the Western country as well. And Mao was the leader in China after the communists took over in 1949. And so they had a different ideology, although Nehru also followed a socialist kind of ideology, but Nehru's socialism was completely different from the communism in China under Mao, which was a variant of the Soviet variety of communism. In the Soviet Union, the role of proletariat was important, but in the case of China, the role of the peasant was important. So ideologically, China was taking a completely different direction. So in that period, the major initiative is being taken by none other than our Prime Minister, the first Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru. And what he wanted to do, he wanted to create a kind of a structure where two of the most powerful countries in Asia, India and China, they can redefine the Asian security architecture, and they can be the model for the other third world countries and the Asian countries which were still colonies. Many of the African countries were still colonies. So they wanted to create a model of friendship, model of relationship between the two countries. But what is happening is that Nehru is trying to play a kind of to bring China closer to India, so that a new kind of architecture can be established in Asia. But there are certain developments which are taking place side by side, and especially what is happening that Tibet enters the PLA, the People's Liberation Army of the Chinese Communist Party. They entered Tibet in 1951. Please understand that Tibet was a buffer state during the British period. In the British period, Tibet was recognized. Tibet was a buffer zone between the British rule in India and the Chinese in the mainland China. Although that was disputed, by the communists. When communists came to power in China, they argued that this kind of demarcation was the imperial demarcation done by the Britishers. So they refused to accept that demarcation. So what you see in 1951 is that PLA, People's Liberation Army of China, they entered Tibet, and they started controlling the region of Tibet. But even that development did not affect India much, especially the leadership much. Even then, Nehru was trying to establish a very strong relationship with China, because probably Nehru believed that if the relationship is strained between India and China, if the relationship is not good between these two important Asian countries, what might happen that the colonial powers again play the politics of divide and rule, where they'll support one country against the other, and there was a fear that these countries can be recolonized. So with that fear, Nehru and the Congress leadership was trying to ignore some of the developments which were taking place in Tibet. Also, please understand that Sardar Patel, who was a very important leader and who wanted to modernize Indian army, who wanted to take a very strong position against China, he was no more after 1950 because he died in 1950. So after that, the entire foreign policy was controlled under the leadership of Jawaharlal Nehru. And Krishna Menon. There were no other political leaders in Congress party who had the stature of Jawaharlal Nehru. So ultimately, what happens in the foreign policy in the period from 1950 till 1960, Nehru is the sole spokesperson for Indian foreign policy, and whatever he decides becomes the final dictum for the Congress party. So there is no major challenge which was emerging either from the Congress party or against the other opposition parties. So that is the period when some of the developments in Tibet are being ignored by Nehru for the sake of friendship between the two important countries, which were trying to redefine their political status in the international system. So I'll take you to the background and the history of Tibet in this context, because please understand that Tibet before 1911, 1912, Tibet was part of the Manchu Emperor of Qing dynasty. But the Qing dynasty, as you know, was overthrown in 1911-12 by the nationalist party Kuomintang in 1912, and that was the period when Tibet declared independence. They said that Tibet, the patron-client relationship which was there in the earlier period, the kind of feudal relationship which was there between Tibet and the mainland China. So Tibetan declared independence in 1913, and that's the same year in 1913. Sir Henry McMahon negotiated a division of Tibet between inner Tibet under the Chinese control and the outer Tibet under Dalai Lama. As you know that British always wanted to maintain a buffer state between India and China, so that there is no direct conflict. So they kind of negotiated a deal where in 1913 that Tibet, again one part of Tibet, the inner Tibet became the part of mainland China, while the outer Tibet was under Dalai Lama. So that was the kind of policy which was initiated by the Britishers. So Tibet in a sense was independent from 1913 till 1951 and 50s, when Chinese incursion took place in Tibet. But the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, disputed this line as imperial line drawn by the Britishers. They said that this line was drawn by the British official, and that was not acceptable to China. Status of Tibet was disputed, and India had a very special rights and with Tibet, and there were certain clauses which favored a kind of free entry of Indians in Tibet, and Tibetans could also come to India. And also please understand that Tibet is a Buddhist state, or Tibet is a Buddhist republic at the moment, and culturally they are very closer to India because of Buddhism religion. And when the Chinese incursion took place in 1951, there were a lot of hue and cry in people. The people when they got the information that Chinese are trying to reoccupy Tibet, so the public sympathy and the public were very angry with the movement, the Chinese movement in Tibet, and the Nehru leadership of the Congress leadership, especially Nehru, also was under pressure to do something. But for the sake of broader friendship between the two countries, to avoid any exploitation by the colonial rulers, Nehru decided in favor of a kind of relinquishing the rights of India over Tibet for the sake of greater friendship between the two important countries in Asia, India and China. And the moment came in 1954, and we'll talk about that. So that Nehru in 1954, when the Sino-Indian Friendship Treaty was signed, so that time Nehru recognized Tibet as an integral part of China. And later on, the same was reiterated by Atal Bihari Vajpayee in 2003 when he went to Beijing. Now, if you can see the map here, this clearly shows the disputed area between India and China. If you see on the top, that's the area held by China and which is claimed by India. That's the area of Aksai Chin, and that is the northwestern border where this is the disputed land. This is the disputed area. India says that this part of India, while this is under the occupation of China at the moment. There are three sectors. If I tell you the border issues between India and China, there are three sectors. One is the western sector, which is the Aksai Chin region. Second is the middle sector, where the borders of Himachal and Uttarakhand they come in they face the Chinese border, and on the eastern side we have the Arunachal Pradesh and the northeastern border, Sikkim, Arunachal Pradesh, etc. So these are the three sectors where the border issue, there are border conflicts between India and China: the western sector, the middle sector, and the eastern sector. In the eastern sector, the entire Arunachal Pradesh is claimed by China as a part of China. Please understand that the McMahon line, which was developed by McMahon, as I told you earlier, so that divides the border, that demarcates the border between India and China in the eastern sector. The McMahon line is not in the entire sector; it's just for the eastern sector and not for the western and the middle sector. So the western sector, as you know, that is still is not demarcated, and it creates a lot of confusion, and as a result you see a lot of incursions taking places, where partly because the boundaries are not clearly demarcated between the two countries. If you see this map, this again clearly tells you that how much of area is under the western sector and how much of area is in the eastern section. So in the western sector there is an area of nearly 33,000 kilometers, which is the area between China's Tibet, Xinjiang, and India's Ladakh. So that's the western sector. In the middle sector there is an area of around 2,000 kilometers, the area between Nagari in China's Tibet, and India's Himachal Pradesh and Uttar Pradesh. In the eastern sector, the northeastern part of India, primarily Arunachal Pradesh and the Chinese border. So these are the three sectors where we have the border disputes, and Aksai Chin is claimed by India, which is under control of China, and Arunachal Pradesh is claimed by China, which is in fact an integral part of India at the moment. Now I'll take you to this prelude to the war. As you know that in 1962 the war took place, but before that you understand that this is very interesting that the war is taking place just after 1954. In 1954 the Sino-Indian, the friendship treaty was signed, and that treaty was supposed to be a very important treaty between the two countries. That was the first important treaty signed by independent India with another important country, and there was a kind of Hindi chini bhai bhai. You might have heard this phrase, and this treaty was signed on the basis of the kind of peaceful coexistence, or the Panchsheel principles, which was devised by India to deal with the other countries. And Panchsheel principles, that became the guiding principles of India's foreign policy in the first few years. And the Panchsheel principles it had certain assumptions. For instance, India will not interfere in the sovereign rights of other countries. India will not adopt an aggressive policy towards any other countries. There is a concept of peaceful coexistence of the neighboring countries. So respecting and non-aggression, respecting the territory of other and non-aggression was the cardinal principle of Panchsheel, and it was a method, or it was a policy to deal with the other countries in a peaceful framework. So in 1954 that is happening, but at the same time what you see that in 1962 a kind of major war is taking place between the two countries. So it's very important to understand the kind of developments which were taking place just after the 1954 period. But if I have to explain the causes or the circumstances which were emerging in the pre-war period, so first important is the uprising which is taking place in Tibet. And the most important uprising is of course the Lhasa uprising in 1959, when Dalai Lama with his followers he took refuge in India, and the place is Dharamshala in Himachal Pradesh. As you know that many of his followers and Dalai Lama, he came to India and he settled in Dharamshala, and Dalai Lama and his followers are still there. If you go to McLeodganj, the place where the Tibetan refugees are there. So that created a kind of huge tension between India and China. The China got an impression that India is trying to support the uprising, the Lhasa uprising, and the previous small protests which were taking place by Tibetans against the Chinese army there. So China thought that probably India is playing a role in those uprisings. And when Dalai Lama with his followers took refuge in India, so that kind of sent a message, or that was construed by Chinese as a clear confirmation of India's role in that uprising. Although that is disputable, India did not have the method and mechanism to clearly support the Lhasa uprising. This also a fact that although India culturally India is very sympathetic to Tibet, but in 1959 India did not have that kind of resources that to support the Tibetan uprising. But since Tibetan refugees and Dalai Lama came to India and took refuge here, so that gave a clear message to China that India is playing a role. Also, please understand the global political situation there. In 1950s, what is happening that in the late 1950s, Khrushchev came to power in the Soviet Union. Khrushchev was a reformist. He was not a typical Stalinist leader. In the 20th Party Congress, what he did is that he basically kind of unraveled or changed the policies, many of the policies of Stalin, which is known in the Soviet literature as de-Stalinization. But since he was trying to reform the Communist Party, since he was the moderate face of the Communist Party, Khrushchev was not liked by Mao Zedong of China. Mao did not like a reformist leader who was trying to change the politics of the Soviet Union, and who was also trying to establish a better relationship with the United States. So that sent a message, or that created a kind of geopolitical and psychological tension in the communist leadership. So what is happening is that there is a kind of drift which is taking place between the Soviet Union or the Soviet ideology and the communist ideology. So communists which were earlier following the Soviet communist ideology, so they were drifting apart in the 1950s, especially after the leaders, especially after the arrival of Khrushchev as the communist leader in the Soviet Union. So that was the broader geopolitical situation which is emerging. And United States was already an adversary of Soviet Union as well as China. So when Soviet Union and United States, they are trying to kind of build up a rapport, they are trying to bridge the relationship. So that gave an impression to Mao that probably these two countries might support India, and which would be dangerous for China. So Mao is getting suspicious of Khrushchev in USSR, and Chinese fear that both the two important countries, the most powerful countries in the world, USSR and USA, they might support India, especially the Nehruvian leadership. So that created a huge tension between India and China. And also please understand that there were certain misconceptions which was emerging among the leadership of China and India. Nehru, who was an idealist leader, Nehru thought that probably Sino-Indian friendship would be the trademark for the relationship between the two countries. He wanted Asia to become the leader, Asia to re-emerge as the leader in the world, because some of the socialist style, because of his notion of the West, which was materialistic, which was hedonistic according to Nehru, so they cannot provide the moral and the real leadership to the world. So the leadership has to come from India and China. So if they can collaborate, if they can become a very important players, so that will completely change the dynamics in Asia as well as the international system. But probably that was a misconception. He never expected that any attack from China will take place. He also misperceived that war can be won by people's support. He was completely in dark. He never realized, he never felt that China can attack India, especially after the Friendship Treaty, and especially because Nehru had supported China in various ways. The diplomatic isolation which was there when the new communist government came to power in 1949. So that was eliminated by many of the countries, partly because of the support of Nehru. Nehru supported China at the various international forums. When it comes to, for instance, the United Nations, where the previous government, the Nationalist Party, so that was recognized as the real rulers of China. But and many of the countries in Africa and Asia, they did not have any diplomatic relationship with China. But Nehru insisted that the new leadership, the Communist Party of China is progressive party, and the other countries should recognize that. And with his support, in Bandung Conference in 1955, China participated. India also supported the case of China at the United Nations. So these were the broader context which kind of created a notion to our Prime Minister, the first Prime Minister Pandit Nehru, that China will never attack India. And he believed that with the socialist ideology, China will not behave like one of the imperialist countries, where you try to acquire the territory of the other country. But that was a misconception that probably had a huge impact on India as well as Nehru's career and future in his future years. So ultimately, what is happening that there is what you see, the situation is escalating, and what you have is a war between India and China. And what were the reasons for the war? And that is also important to understand. First, of course, the most important reason is the case of Tibet, where Chinese felt that the uprising in Tibet is probably because of the Indian support, India's tacit support, and the resistance in Tibet was explained or interpreted by Chinese as something which is being provoked by the Indian. That may not be the case, but the reality is not something which determines the policy. Often more than reality is the perception which matters, and the perception among the Chinese leadership was that India was playing a very important role in provoking Tibetan uprising in Lhasa and other places. So that was one of the most important causes of war between India and China in 1962. The second was also because China is a very ambitious country, and China is a civilizational state. So both the countries, India and China, they were vying for leadership in the Afro-Asian world. Nehru was a very powerful leader in the third world countries. Nehru was recognized throughout the post-colonial countries as the leader of a greater stature. Mao similarly, Mao had a similar aspiration to emerge as the important leader in the third world countries, and because the communist and socialist ideology is not confined to just one state, they have a policy to promote the ideology to other states. So as a result, he was also trying to become the leader of the Afro-Asian states. The third factor, of course, was the undefined borders which are there between between China and India. And partly because of the British rule, the borders were not clearly defined. Whether it's in the western sector or the middle or the eastern sector, the borders are clearly not well defined. China refused to accept the McMahon line, and India refused to accept that Aksai Chin is a part of China. In fact, it is said that in the early years, when Zhou Enlai came to India, he offered that if India recognizes Aksai Chin as a part of China, then China will also recognize Arunachal Pradesh as part of India. But that simply did not happen. Please understand that in a democracy, if you have created a perception that Aksai Chin is a part of India, so it's very difficult for the democratic leadership to change that perception, because please understand that there are opposition parties which will always utilize any kind of deal or bargain which is done by the ruling party. If Congress had made a deal, or if Congress had accepted Aksai Chin as a part of China, so that will be considered a kind of a betrayal by the other party. The political parties, the opposition parties will try to make political mileage, and they'll say that the Congress party and the Nehru gave a territory to China. So it's very difficult in a democracy to have deals on the land and the borders and the boundaries. So that's the reason we have not been able to solve some of the boundary disputes with China and also with Pakistan, because the ceding the territory becomes almost impossible for a democratic government, because that can be utilized by the opposition parties. And there is also a misperception of Mao in India, and Mao also misperceived Nehruvian leadership. For Mao, for instance, who was a communist leader, for Mao, Nehru was a leader of bourgeois. That Nehru represented the capitalist bourgeois leadership. He was not socialism for Mao was not the acceptable ideology, and basically because of Nehru's alliances with the capitalist countries, and also because Nehru pursued a policy of mixed economy where private players were allowed to have a dominant role in the economy or important role in the economy. So that kind of policy gave a notion to Mao that probably India is emerging as one of the capitalist countries, and some kind of clash is inevitable between the capitalist and the communist China. So Nehru was enamored by the socialist ideals and thought that socialist progressive socialist progressive forces will never play the hard power politics of the imperial power. So these were the broader reasons of kind of misperception and which led to the escalation of conflict between the two countries. I'll just repeat briefly: Tibet, rivalry for influence, and the borders. These were the three important reasons why these two countries came to conflict. Now, the important thing is that once conflict has taken place, that has a huge impact in the relationship between the two countries. The country which is defeated or humiliated, it's not easy for that country to overcome the psychological trauma that it has faced because of the defeat. And the history and the historical narratives, they always emphasize that betrayal or the defeat, and it's very difficult for the political leadership to overcome that psychological and the political tragedy that the defeated country faced because of the defeat. The impact of China, that completely changed the kind of new dynamism in Asia. These two countries, had they been together, probably they would have been the most important. They would have defined the architecture or the security architecture in Asia. But what is happening that after 1962 war, there is a complete freeze in the Sino-Indian relationship till almost 1988, when Rajiv Gandhi visited China, and then a new kind of relationship started taking shape. But before that, there was a freeze in Sino-Indian relationship. Of course, before earlier, Atal Bihari Vajpayee visited China in 1979. So if you leave that aside, there is not much of engagement between the two states. What is happening is another important feature which will again have an impact on the Asian security. There is a China-Pak Alliance which is emerging. China, before 1962, was not probably supporting Pakistan. But what is happening after 1962, that there is a closer cooperation which is emerging between Pakistan and China. Because in 1965, India had a conflict, India had a war with Pakistan. Again in 1971, India had a war with Pakistan over the issue of Bangladesh. So after that, there is a kind of cooperation which is emerging between the two countries, China and Pakistan. And that relationship to a large extent define the Asian security, especially in South Asia, and that continues. That alliance is even there between between China and Pakistan. The fact that Pakistan has developed some of the weapons, the fact that the Pakistan is very confident when it comes to fighting with India, is partly because of the support of two countries. One is United States, which has been supporting Pakistan on Kashmir issue, which has been providing armaments, which also provided a lot of support and aid to Pakistan against the Soviet Union over the issue of Afghanistan. So Pakistan was backed by United States on the one hand, and Pakistan was also supported by China in the late 1960s and 70s and onwards. What is happening in India is that there is a new kind of alliance which is emerging, where the Indo-Soviet friendship treaty was signed in 1971, and that completely pushed India to the side of Soviet Union, while China and Pakistan, they started coming closer to the United States. Please understand that in the early years, China was closer. In the 1950s, China was closer to Soviet Union, but after Khrushchev, there's a drift in the ideology. There is a drift between China and Soviet Union, and in 1972, what you see is Nixon visited China. So that completely changed the dynamics, because United States started using China against its biggest enemy, which was the Soviet Union. So what happens in the 1970s and even in 1980s, some kind of understanding is emerging between United States, China, and Pakistan. And United States supported China. United States also supported Pakistan, and in fact, it is argued that Pakistan played a very important role in bringing these two countries, China and United States, closer. So India in 1971, India becomes the part of the Soviet bloc. In a sense, it became the part of Soviet bloc. Although India kept saying that the guiding principle for India is Panchsheel and non-alignment movement, but the critiques and the Western power took, after the 1971 treaty, they considered India as a part of the Soviet bloc rather than a really neutral country. Now it's important to understand what is the position of United States and the Soviet Union in 1962 war. Very interestingly, you will find that Soviet Union, despite the fact that Soviet Union had a treaty with China that in case there is a conflict between China and some other country, Soviet Union will come to the rescue of China and Soviet Union will support China. But when it came to a conflict between India and China, Soviet Union took a very neutral position. And Soviet Union did not support China, nor practically it supported India in real terms. Very strangely, if you see, United States actually through various not so open methods supported India during the 1962 war. In fact, one of the reasons why China got suspicious was that the Lhasa uprising. In the Lhasa uprising, CIA, the intelligence agency of America, that played a very important role. And some of the declassified documents which have been declassified by the American government, they say that CIA was functional in even Dharamshala. Dharamshala was the place where the Tibetan refugees came and settled down. So United States was supporting India in some way, although they were not openly supported in India, not taking any side, because Soviet Union and USSR, they were facing a different kind of geopolitical crisis, especially the Cuban Missile Crisis and all. So in that kind of situation, United States did not take any particular side, but in tacit ways or in some ways, US was taking side of India in the 1962 war. But after 1960, after the deal that was signed between the Indo-Soviet Friendship Treaty, after that signature, US turned very hostile to India, and US started supporting Pakistan. US raised the issue of Kashmir, and it was saved only because of the veto rights of Soviet Union. But otherwise, US completely took the side of Pakistan, and US also supported China, as I mentioned earlier. So that was the period when there was from 1962 to almost 1988, there was not much of engagement taking place between the two countries. In fact, in 1986-87, after 1962, this was the second phase or the second incident where in Sumdorong Chu in eastern sector, where both armies came to almost conflict. That is the region where in the eastern sector, and that was the time when the brass tacks, which was the Indian militarization program, the massive military exercise took place in this code named, which is called brass tacks. So after that, there was some kind of the tension or the conflicts or skirmishes between India and Pakistan. At the same time, that was a period when on one border, Indo-Pak border, you had the firings. Also conflicts emerged in the eastern sector, where China and Indian army, they faced each other, and they had some kind of conflict and skirmishes. So that created a huge tension in India, partly because both the Pakistan border and on the eastern sector, which is Chinese border, India was facing the face off with the two armies, the powerful armies of China on the one hand and the Pakistani army on the other. So that created a huge tension in India. But what happens after that is a very pragmatic policy developments where India is doing military modernization on the one hand, but at the same time is trying to engage with China. In 1988, as you see, Rajiv Gandhi visited Beijing, and that opened a new vistas of friendship and cooperation between the two states. What you see after is completely different story. There is a kind of intensive engagement at various levels between the two countries, both India and China. So the first phase in India-China relationship was the 1949 to 1954. That was a period of friendship, a kind of cooperation agreements, a lot of goodwill, India-China YY period. The second phase, 1954 till 1959, what you see is kind of a tension is escalating. Tension is escalating between the two countries, and despite the visit of the Chinese leadership to India in 1957 and 1960, the problems are not resolved. So that was the second phase in the relationship when the tension is emerging, which is culminating, which is escalating in the final war between India and China in 1962. So that was the second phase. Third phase is completely frozen relationship, when even the diplomatic relationship was not there. Diplomatic relationship was established in late 1970s, but before that there was absolutely no interaction between the two states in the bilateral forums. The third phase comes, or the fourth phase comes after 1988, when there is a continuous and gradual engagement between the two states. Now, what are the issues that define India-China security concerns? Tibet is one issue. Arunachal Pradesh is the second issue. Please understand that when a person from Arunachal Pradesh try to visit China, they say that since Arunachal Pradesh is a part of China, they claim, so they don't issue the visa. They don't issue the normal visa which is issued to the Indian citizenship. So that issue has been raised time and again by the Chinese leadership, but that is not acceptable to India because Arunachal Pradesh is an integral part of India, and historically and otherwise, Arunachal Pradesh is much closer to India than it is to China. And the border issues I have already explained, but please understand that no direct confrontation between the two countries have taken place, except of course the Samdurang in 1986-87. So except that the relationship has not been friendly between the two states, but at the same time there no direct military confrontation between two states, and that should be considered a remarkable achievement for the two states. On the Pak border, on the other hand, what we see is the regular exchange of fires, and the armies and the civilians both are killed due to the firing on the Indo-Pak border, but that's not the case on the Sino-Indian border. Both the countries have successfully maintained some kind of status quo where they have avoided direct military confrontation between the two states. So that should be considered a remarkable achievement. China-Pak Alliance, as I told you, that has created a lot of irritation between the two states. That came after 1962. China supported Pak by supplying arms and missiles and nuclear technology. In fact, it is said that through North Korea, China has been supporting the nuclear armament of Pakistan. China has also developed the Karakoram Highway, which connects Xinjiang and China with Pakistan. China is supporting Pakistan in rebuilding the Gwadar port, and is also developing roads which will connect Xinjiang with Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. Now, some of the people argue that China is trying to contain India, and the theory given by the Pentagon was, Pentagon is the military, the headquarters of United States. So Pentagon came with the theory of the string of pearl theory. So there is a string of pearl theory where China is trying to contain India through that string, starting from Chittagong in Bangladesh, where is building the port. In Sri Lanka, Haman Batota, that's the port which is being built by the Chinese leadership, and further it goes up north to Pakistan, where in Gwadar China is building the port. So that has given a kind of metaphorically is called that China is trying to contain India through this string of pearls which is trying to create for India. And what is the Indian response? Indian response has been very clearly articulated in the last few years, especially in the 1990s and later years, when India also tried to develop a kind of a response to the containment policy. And the first important step was when India tried to have a close cooperation with Vietnam. Please understand that there is a conflict between Vietnam and China on the South China Sea over the issue of territory and the several of islands in the South China Sea. And South China Sea is important also because of the energy factors. People believe that there are certain energy possibilities in South China Sea. So apart from the sea route, which the navigation route for China and Chinese energy, that is also important for energy in the various coral islands that you have it there. So India started cooperating with Vietnam in the South China Sea, and that kind of sent a message to China that India is also trying to respond to the areas where China is vulnerable. Then India is also building a port in Chabahar in Iran. Chabahar in Iran is very close to the Gwadar port in Pakistan. So if China is developing Gwadar port in Pakistan, India is also developing Chabahar port in Iran. And India is also trying to modernize its military. If you take the example of Agni missile, the Sukhoi, the nuclear submarines, the aircraft carrier Vikramaditya, all these are basically meant to fight a strong country. They are not meant for Pakistan. So all of these are the weapons which can be used in case there is a conflict between the two countries. So India is also trying to modernize military to balance the power equation in the Asian region. And India is also trying to develop border roads in northeastern states, and the new government of this NDA, they are focusing on the border road development projects. So they have clearly said that that's an important priority of India's development in the next few years. And India is also trying to develop a relationship with Japan and many of the Southeast Asian states. So if China is trying to develop relations with Pakistan and Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, India is also trying to have a very close strategic cooperation with countries like Japan, South Korea, Southeast Asian states. So that is creating a kind of that China will say that this is the Indian containment of China. India is also having a closer relations with the United States in the last few years. So that is again giving an impression to China that probably India is going closer to United States so that it can contain China. So now I'll take you to the next phase of intensive engagement which started especially after the 1990s. So if you see, there are just few summit meetings till 1990. From 1950 to 1990, there were just four meetings. One was when Nehru visited in 1954, that was the first visit. When in 1957, Zhou Enlai and Nehru, they met in Delhi. In 1960, Zhou Enlai again came and met Nehru in Delhi. Fourth was when Rajiv Gandhi visited Beijing. So these were just four meetings which took place between the two countries till 1990. So in the entire 40 years, you have just four meetings. But what you see after that, as you can see, from 1991 to 2014, there is a regular meeting between the two head of states. Narasimha Rao also visited Beijing, then Vajpayee visited, Manmohan Singh visited, then several Chinese leadership visited India. So there is a regular exchange of leadership between the two states, and that tells you that there is a kind of intensive engagement which is taking place between the two states. But the landmark agreement was again India-China strategic dialogue, which took place in 2005. This deal was important because the term that India and China, who were considered adversaries, the term strategic dialogue, or they became the strategic partnership. They developed the strategic partnership between the two states. So that's the reason 2005, that year is important in terms of India-China relationship. Sikkim was recognized as a part of China, and it said that Hu Jintao, when he came to India, he came with a map of Sikkim. India was also offered the observer status in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization in 2005. In the deal took place between the two countries, they also decided to have joint naval exercises. And that was a year in that agreement. Through that agreement, both the countries, India and China, they also started discussing the issue of Chinese support to Pakistan, and the nuclear issue. Please understand that, excuse me. Please understand that China was not recognizing India as a nuclear state, especially after the nuclear blast that India undertook and declared India as a nuclear power, but this was not acceptable to China. And China will not talk about the nuclear issue when it came to negotiation with India. But after 2005, the issue of Chinese support to Pakistan, that was discussed between the two countries. The nuclear apartheid, which was maintained by the nuclear powers, so that also went away, and China started discussing the nuclear issues with India after 2005. In fact, now there are certain nuclear reactors which are being supplied by China to India, and India also supplies nuclear reactors to China. So that constitutes one of the important aspects of trade between the two countries. So these are 2005 was an important year in terms of India-China relationship because of the strategic dialogue or strategic partnership which was established between the two countries. Now, please understand the trade. Trade is an important aspect of the relationship between the two states, and in 2011, India and China were the largest trading partner. In 2012, it came down 10% further down because of the global recession and all. But even then, in 2012, the figure was $66.57 billion, and China has overtaken United States in terms of its trade with India. So for India, China has emerged as one of the largest, the biggest trading partner for India. So the economic dynamism has grown in the last few years. Just 10 years back, the trade between the two countries was just $2 billion, but it has touched almost $70 billion in the last in 2012, and it has the potential, and both the leaders have planned to develop it to nearly $100 billion. India's main exports to China are iron ore, cotton fabric, copper, precious stone, chemicals, machinery, etc. And India imports nuclear reactor, boiler, electric machinery, chemical fertilizers, and so on. So these are the items of trade between the two countries. Now it's important that Xi Jinping, the second landmark visit was Xi Jinping's visit to India in September 2014, just 2 months back. What is the significance of this deal? Please understand that China promised to invest $20 billion in India. So that was the most significant aspect of this deal. China will also set up 2 industrial parks, one in Gujarat and another in Maharashtra. And China will also help India in modernization of the railways. And they're planning to have a railway university in India. There was a sister city agreement between the two, between Mumbai and Shanghai on the one hand, and Guangzhou and Ahmedabad, and Guangdong and Gujarat, the 2 provinces. So these were the agreements which were signed between when Xi Jinping visited India in September 2014, and also the pilgrims now they have a new route to visit the Kailash Mansarovar. Hindu pilgrims, when they want to go to Mansarovar, the traditional route was through Uttarakhand, which is very difficult. So now the Nathula Pass in Sikkim, that will be open for pilgrims to visit to Mansarovar Lake and Kailash Mansarovar visit. But the entire euphoria which was created when Xi Jinping visited India, so that euphoria went down or faded away because of the Chinese incursions which took place simultaneously in the Ladakh region, in the Chumar in Ladakh, and also the civilian face-off that took place in Demchok region. So that created a tension, and in fact Prime Minister Modi had to give the statement that both India and China should come to an early resolution of the border conflicts. So that created a tension when the president, the Chinese leader Xi Jinping was here. Even then the military was trying, the Chinese military was intruding in some parts of India. But please understand that incursion, what you say, incursions are partly also because the borders are not clearly defined. What India considers its own border, China claims its own. So these kind of incursions are almost, they should not be taken very seriously unless and until there are real probability or possibility of conflict. Because if you read the Chinese newspaper, they'll say that Indian army intruded into the Chinese territory, and China, if you read the Indian newspapers, so there are always claims that Chinese army intruded into the Indian territory on the border. So it's partly because of a misconception or the absence of the clear demarcation of the border. And this year alone, more than 334 incursions have taken place. Although some of them are very serious, especially when Chinese army, the PLA comes and tries to encamp in one place or try to create a post in particular place, stays for some time. So that creates a lot of tension, and there is a kind of possibility of conflict which might escalate on the borders. But please understand, so these are the bilateral issues, but there are certain areas where the two countries are also cooperating. Especially when it comes to multilateral cooperation, you know that the India and China both are playing very important role. In the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, where they are cooperating, they have established New Development Bank, Contingency Reserve Fund. SCO has also offered membership to India, and on the climate change, both the countries have been negotiating. So with this, I would like to conclude the paper by saying that the relationship with China is competitive on the one hand, and also cooperative on the other. So there are certain issues which are conflicting, especially the border issues. But both the countries in near future should try to demarcate the border, which will solve the problem in a very great way. So with this, I conclude my presentation today. I hope you liked it. Thank you so much.
I'm sure that the students liked it. In fact, they would have really gained a lot from this presentation, a very lucid presentation at that. And with this, I would like to thank sir for being here, and also tell our viewers that we have more to look forward to in our series on India's foreign policy. So watch out for these lectures. Thank you and have a great day. Thank you.